Hello, Tansei. My name is Danielle Serenk. Some know me as the Squamish Medium, and I am your host and founder of Spirit School, the podcast and international school of spiritual studies. And I'm excited to continue the journey of looking at mediumship through the different teachings of the chakras, the energy centers, and today we'll be touching on the heart chakra, which is also known as the bridge chakra. And it's a really intelligent way to look at it as a bridge because this is the center of integration. If you go back to my teachings around root, sacral, and solar plexus, these are very personal lived experiences that are quite highly emotionally charged. There's a lot to process here. There's a lot to understand here. There's a lot to move through and work through here. The higher chakras are seen as our more spiritual centers, our center of truth, our center of vision and premonition, and our center of divine connection and ultimate faith. So to transition from this really personal experience to this more ethereal experience, the heart then becomes a bridge, and the bridge becomes a center of integration. So this heart as a bridge also, I find, is our essence. I'm sure that you have been in communities, you have been in workplaces, you have been in dynamics where you can feel the heart from somebody. You can get a sense when somebody loves their job, they really want to be there, and they are fulfilled in what they are doing. And a lot of this isn't even the action or things that are said, it is because you can feel the heart within it. How do I want to be introduced in a room energetically? That is all done through the heart space. Out there in the real world, I'm known as somebody who will always give a hug as a way to greet. I'm a really big hugger. And I realized after many years of doing this that there is something profound in heart-to-heart contact. I once heard a quote that said, 6 hugs a day to stay well. And I could see that. I could see how regulating it is and how there's like an imprint that happens heart to heart when we hug. So next time you go give somebody a hug, please do pay attention to what animates within you when you are giving that hug. Do you feel an expansion in the heart chakra? Alternately, when we are talking to people and we have somebody share something really hard with us, one of the physical reactions that we have that's very natural is to go like this. And this is a way to signify to others, like I felt that in my heart. And also it's a way that we protect our hearts when we are engaging in heart-related matters. And it's not that we want to push away this heart connection, but it's a way of honoring my heart animated as we began talking about this deep topic that's rooted to grief. And so we relate through this energy center organically a lot more than we may give credit for. When I sit with newly developing spiritual practitioners or mediums and I teach them how to sit in their presence, aka sit in the power, but sit in your own presence essentially to get to know it intimately. And I ask them after, can you point to where on your body you felt animate, come alive, when you connected in with your spirit? And about 80% of the class will point to their hearts, and the other group will point to their throat. That's why we sit in our essence. And I started to realize the more I did this deep work looking at mediumship from these different philosophical lenses, was that that's our spirit. Like that's what animates within us when we are preparing to communicate and to connect with the divine for the intention of healing and reconciliation. So this is a bridge chakra, but this is where our essence sits. This is the part of us that leads, the part of us that comes to life, and the part of us that animates when we're doing our spirit work, or when we're doing deep connection and relational work with one another. So pay attention to this when you're around people who are supportive, people who bring you joy, when you're deep into your service work. And in truth, like this is such a deep state of integration that even in a moment of like frazzledness, say I'm with a client that I'm getting a whole bunch of no's or I'm not feeling very confident, the only way to come back to center for me is to drop all my energy and call back all my energy into the heart space. Truly, this is a space of continual replenishment. I have only ever found one thing that could deplete this space, And I'm going to lead into that next, which is grief. Now, I personally did not experience grief, and I mean capital G grief, the loss of a loved one, until 2020. And this grief destroyed my heart. It hurt to breathe. My heart felt broken. I wondered if you could survive that type of pain. And I had been a medium up until that time since 2013. So I was 7 years into my journey. I actually pursued end-of-life doula certification in 2019 just so I could understand grief deeper, because I had been for years sitting with people in deep states of grief and could have a lot of, compassion, but I really didn't understand empathetically like what grief felt like until 2020, and I had my first loss. And grief is the only thing that I can think of, and I've thought about this for years now, like 6 years since my first big loss. It's the only thing that I felt could even penetrate the heart space. The heart space, to me, until that point, felt like an endless well of renewal, except for grief. Now, once I experienced grief from the loss of a loved one, I also recognized I have experienced grief before. Maybe not to this extreme, but I experienced grief when I left my first partner, my first husband, when I went through divorce when I was 24. I remember grief when I left my second partner. Didn't marry them, thank goodness, but the grief was intense and deep. I remember leaving my career in the motorsports world and telling my boss, who was a family member to me, truly, a chosen family member, but we became family. I remember telling him I was moving on. And I think that was deeper grief telling him than even leaving my first partner. So I could see through my life that I had experienced grief before, but now I was a medium who relied on my heart center to do my work, because this was my center of starting point. I always start in the heart chakra when I do my mediumship, because this is where my essence is, right? This is where the animation comes from. And I panicked in 2020 when I experienced grief for my first time, because guess what? I couldn't do readings. My grief was so deep, I could not do readings. And I had just quit my career in First Nations healthcare to pursue mediumship full time. At this time, September 2020, I was only 4 months into my teaching career, which now is the majority of my career is teaching. But back then, I relied on all my income to be from readings, and I was a new entrepreneur. And I had to take a really big break from doing readings because my heart was so broken. And in fact, I sought out a medium mentor at that time for the first time in years, not to learn how to become a better medium, but how to become a medium with a broken heart. I did not know how to connect. That's how penetrating grief was for me then. And the truth was, because the pandemic was happening, I was the mom of 2 young kids, I was a new entrepreneur. What ended up happening in my case was I bypassed a lot of my grief through avoidance tendencies, through keeping busy, through overworking, which is one of my trauma responses, is to overwork. And I know now that for so many of us who hold space for others with grief, who experience firsthand or vicarious secondary trauma from holding space for people with deep grief, that unprocessed, unresolved grief could be something that could keep this heart space maybe overprotected or not as open, or not in a space where we could freely give from a place of service when the time calls. Not all the time, but when the time calls. So these are the matters that we will have to work through when it comes to the heart chakra center and within our own mediumship. Now, I personally am not someone who has continuously carried the grief of others through my life, but I have worked with people who have identified as empath or empathic, who definitely can and have experienced that. So there are definitely like heart wall practitioners, emotion code practitioners. There are many different ways. Therapy for me, I've had the same therapist for 10 years to help me with some of my unresolved grief and processing. But this is a lot of the heart of the work to integrate our personal lived experiences, maybe some of the trauma that we're responsible for healing through. Again, trauma is not our fault, but we do have a responsibility to tend to it through our human experience. This is really where that deep work goes as mediums. And truly, the more that we work through this ourselves, not only does that better our human experience and mature us spiritually, but we can become more effective space holders and practitioners for others when we do this deep work for ourselves and we don't avoid it. So my encouragement to all the developing humans out there is to spend some time to process some of the unresolved grief that we do carry, for things that we had to kind of move through and get on with for the sake of the hustle of life. And this is the deep work that we have to do as mediums within this energy center. Lastly, I wanted to touch on the heart of mediumship and spirit work. And this might be a different way of looking at this energy center, but the heart chakra and mediumship really rules our ethics and our integrity as well. Every practitioner, because mediumship is an unregulated space, there are definitely people who attempt to put regulation and structure and certification, but that's all man-made and very chosen. Ultimately, we work for the spirit world. Ultimately, every spirit that chooses me as a communicator, I'm going to face one day, and I'm going to hope that I'm made proud. And there's a lot of ethics and integrity that we have to do the deep work with the spirit world, with the world of energy, with the world of creator, God, whatever it is that you believe in. This is the level of integrity and ethics that I am talking about, not just answering to other humans, though that is ultimately important, to be wear your ethics on your sleeve and to be very outspoken about your ethics, to have policies and ways to prepare your client in an ethical way, because this is an unregulated space. And in mediumship, we are working in vulnerable situations. Grief is highly traumatic. We are working with people who are moving through very vulnerable human experiences. There's a power dynamic we can't ignore that exists. Doesn't matter how secure or insecure you feel, it absolutely exists. And so it's really important to do that work on our ethics, which is our outward facing work, right? What do we stand for? What do we stand by? How do we prepare people? How do we get the levels of consent that are required to do this work? How do we maintain that trust? These are all very action-based things. But as we go to our inner world experience and we go to integrity, this is where we experience integrity. Integrity is an inner world experience. We are all out of integrity every once in a while, and that is an uncomfortable truth. I remember being in a workplace that I didn't want to be there, and I really did just stay because of the money, and that wasn't living in integrity. I will say that at that time, when I wasn't honoring what I actually wanted to do and how I wanted to live and what I was feeling called to do, how fractured I felt inside, because I wasn't living in integrity. Integrity is about like when nobody's watching, when nobody else knows, just you and whatever it is that you believe in. That's integrity, and that's an inner world experience that only you will know when you're experiencing this fractal energy here. I'm always having to look at how do I reconcile this within. So I talk about this because the heart of mediumship, the heart of this spirit work is ethics and integrity. So you could go to my Instagram, you can go to my website, you can look at my about me, you could look at here's how I speak about my work. I always lead with integrity through the actions that I take, which is how I display my ethics. And that's how I feel comfortable courageously standing at the front of an unregulated space and industry. So I didn't want to leave the topic of heart chakra without touching on ethics and integrity. If you come into my program, The Declaration, which is an ethics program for practitioners in unregulated spaces, this is how I talk about the heart chakra. It is all about ethics. And ethics creates an energy that I believe magnetizes the right people to your practice. So it's worth exploring. It's worth tuning into the heart and asking it, what do I stand for? Who do I serve? And how do I walk every step of my life with this guiding me? So I hope you enjoyed some of my thoughts as a medium who has been doing this work for 13 years now, and how I see the teachings of the heart chakra, the heart energy center, in relation to being a medium, developing mediumship, and serving humanity in the spirit world as a medium. I will see you next time on the Spirit School podcast as we move up the energy centers to the throat chakra.